Hello, my name is Todd Birdsong. I'm the director of the Clemens Fine Arts Center at West Kentucky Community and Technical College, and welcome to another episode of Stage Sessions. Today our guest is Johanna Comisak-Rhodes. She's a retired school teacher and journalist here in Paducah, and we're here to talk to her today about her father and his history and legacy with photography. Welcome, Johanna.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to talk about photography.
Well, yeah, so am I. I mean, I'm a photographer and I love everything about it. I love film, I love digital, I love alternative processes, you name it, I love it. And so what we're talking about today, though, you and I have had this conversation, well, kind of this conversation. It's been ongoing. Seems like a really long time. I remember talking to you back at the Paducah School of Art and Design several years ago. Maybe it was even during the grand opening or shortly after that. And we talked about your father and his history with photography. So I'm really curious to know some of the stories that you're going to share with us today.
Okay, well, I'm really pleased that I was able to honor him with, his name is on a door at the Paducah School of Art and Design. It's the John H. Comisak photography studio there, and he had a lifelong interest in art and photography. In fact, he wanted to become a graphic artist. It was not to be, and so later in life, and which we'll get into all of that, he turned to photography. I chose to be a journalist, and so naturally photography went along with that, and so I kind of followed what he did, and I really want to talk about the early things in photography and what made his photography. I mean, everybody takes pictures, but I think he had a kind of a unique story.
Right. So, you're talking about you being a journalist and your father's interest in photography, and maybe that interest influenced you in some way. I don't suppose, and probably not, but was there ever an an incident where maybe you and your father were able to work on something together?
Well, actually not as a young child. We sort of bumped heads when I would ask him photography questions, and that sort of thing, teenager and all. But when I was 25, he and I bought cameras together. In fact, this is his camera right here, this Nikon. And I bought one just like that. It was a 35 millimeter Nikon F2. Of course, that was, still in the film. We used it manually. It was a manual camera. You had to focus. You had to figure out your lighting conditions, your F number, all of that. And so we took a trip together and we took photos together.
Oh,
and so it was really neat. It was kind of the coming together of all of that.
Right. I've tried to do that with all four of my children, successfully with one.
Yes.
So, no, but you're right. Those types of things are great, family kind of bonding. Those are great memories, surely, to have. So let's get back on track to your father's story, and let's go back to those early days. Let's talk about him starting out. So you mentioned that maybe the photography was the thing that he really wanted to do, but he wasn't able to do. What's that story?
Correct. He was born in 1908. I mean, we're going back more than 100 years ago, in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. And he was the oldest of 6 children at that time. The family moved to St. Louis, and he had an interest in art. He made his best grades in school in art. And at the age of 16, he had to quit school, forget his dreams per se, because he had to help support the family. And of course it was quite normal to do that at that time. But he did continue school. He became a machinist under his father, an apprentice, and he told me that he walked 40 blocks to an evening school, and he got more courses, did many more hours in machine shop practice and also mechanical drawing. So after all of this, the next step for him was right after the Depression started, he got a job on towboats as an engineer, first as an oiler, a striker, and various things, because we were dealing with steam engines back then, and he went up and down the Mississippi River for the federal barge lines in towboats like you see passing Paducah. He had one time off because he had malaria. If you can imagine someone in this country in the 1930s being sick with malaria.
And he caught the malaria
on the boat, on
Yeah.
the towboat going up and down the Mississippi River.
Wow.
And that got me into looking into malaria here in the United States. It was not until the late 1940s that they no more called it a health hazard in this country, which, you know, that's before I was born, but it just really seems strange. It seems like a third world country
Right.
kind of malady. He then went back to Pittsburgh and worked for the Dravo Corporation.
And
It's a towboat firm.
Okay.
In fact, Dravo tows still come, I guess, it's still a company up and down the Ohio River as well. And he was an engineer there. He worked on locks for the Pickwick Dam for TVA. And he was the engineer on the tow that took the locks to Pickwick. And so, you know, he was kind of involved in maybe some of this, the history of this area. Mm-hmm. When World War II started, he entered the Merchant Marines, or actually it was called then Maritime School. Okay. Because of his engineering background. And he graduated as a third engineer, and immediately after the war started traveling the world. And in fact, he went to every country in the world, every continent except Australia.
Wow.
And here is where he was able to become the photographer he always wanted to be.
So how did that happen? How did was there an opportunity there? Did the Merchant Marine, or was there a job opening, I guess? Was there?
Oh, yes, they found jobs for the candidate. He went to this Marine Officer Training School. Okay. In New London, Connecticut. It was set up because of the war, and they were overseen by the U.S. Coast Guard. And he made trips carrying fuel and so forth during the war. And then after the war, I assume, I didn't ask him these things, we need to ask our parents and older people, why did you continue that? But obviously he always had wanderlust and itchy foot. He liked to travel. Mm-hmm. And so it was just perfect for him having the job as a third engineer on these freighters that took all kinds of cargo around the world. Grain, I have some pictures which we'll see. Cars, they took bags of flour. They picked up things overseas and brought it back to the United States. They picked up lumber and took it. It was fascinating. But his job was down below where the engines were, working with the steam gauges and valves, and it was an extremely hot job. He said that they worked 6 hours on and 6 hours off. And when he came back to his cabin, there he had his darkroom set up, and he printed pictures from all the places that he went. And I'm sure that he also printed pictures that he sent back to some of the people that he met, because I found a little address book with some names of, you know, this person from Odessa, Russia, and this person from Calcutta, wherever. And he printed the pictures, and the pictures that we're looking at here in a moment, they're ones that he had already had developed and printed. I have thousands of negatives. If I had a dark room, I could print thousands of pictures from all of these trips, which I just find fascinating.
Oh, it is. So when you say he went back to his cabin, we're not talking about a cabin in the woods. We're talking about the cabin, the place where he slept on the boat, right?
Right. It's just a small room, and he had a bed. I don't even know if he had a bathroom, but you can see his place where he had his enlarger, his cameras hanging up on the wall, his light meter, their boxes of film and printing paper,
and, chemistry and the
chemistry,
trays, and,
a stack of the pictures that he's already printed. Now, most of what he did was in black and white, but there are some color pictures.
Well, and color is a completely different world. I mean,
Right.
in film photography, at least. I mean, black and white, chemistry is relatively simple. There's a little latitude maybe in...
I'm not sure if he did the color
on the boat?
Yes.
Okay.
Because these are slides. I would say
okay.
Ektachrome slides,
Okay.
Maybe.
Right.
And it's very interesting. In fact, we'll see a couple of the same scene with color and black and white.
Nice. Okay.
And what fascinated me from looking at the pictures, and they're pictures that they're not identified as we go through, but they're pictures from France. There's some pictures from Germany. There's a bombed church in Germany. There are pictures from Greece, from Piraeus and Athens, and you see touristy pictures where people were, they're tourists. You'll see there's a man in a army uniform. There are two young men who are obviously Greek, and one has a gun. We're talking about when he was doing this. It was 1947 to 1950, and the war was just over in Europe. And so they're just getting back to life as normal life there.
Right. So he's carrying around this camera. I'm sure he's wearing some type of maybe uniform.
No, they didn't wear uniforms.
Okay.
This was pre being military.
Okay. So he's out in the world.
Right.
In a far off place, different land. Maybe speaks the language, maybe he doesn't speak the language.
Doesn't speak the language,
Okay.
only speaks English.
Okay, so he's got this camera. So what's that like? Were there any stories about, did the camera ever get him in trouble? Or just the opposite? Did the camera open a door to a situation or to something that he didn't expect?
I think it opened doors. And he's the kind of person, he was sort of a quiet person, but he could be friendly, sort of move slowly towards people. And it's just amazing. There are pictures, you'll see him standing with some people from wherever it is, like France or West Africa or Korea. And then there are pictures from India where everybody comes up and they want to be in the picture. And I think it opened doors. This was a novelty. It wasn't like today where everybody's got some kind of a camera or a telephone or you're taking a selfie. And so I think in those years it might have been something special that at this time in these places, people did not see others with cameras coming around taking, so they wanted to be in the pictures. They wanted to, even though they weren't going to see them or whatever.
Right. But there was a fascination, this novel piece of equipment that maybe some knew about, maybe some didn't.
And also probably seeing an American.
Right.
Because one of his favorite places was India. To take pictures, and he took pictures not necessarily of touristy places, but people on the street. And he labeled a lot of his pictures. For example, there's one, Pakistani refugees. So there's a big group of Pakistani refugees, street performers. There was one very nice picture of a Turkish stevedore who really looked pretty rough, and other crew members from different ships. And it was just a whole range. And very interesting that here about 1950, we're talking 70 years ago, primitive conditions in many places, like Bombay, India, which I grew up saying Bombay, but it's Mumbai, and Ceylon, which is now Myanmar. And so he was there at a sort of a different time than now.
I wonder if that would, like if he felt, he may not have felt this at all, but I mean, just kind of hearing the stories and it being described, it's kind of like an unofficial ambassador, maybe. You know, like spreading the goodwill. Some of the things you described earlier about the cargo that they carried, I mean, it sounded an awful lot like humanitarian kind of efforts.
Yes, it seems that way, and of course that's what freighters and cargo ships do. And I was amazed to see all the people that it took. You know, when one of these freighters came in to port, docked, you see all of these men milling around here, and it was so labor intensive. And in the late 1940s, you see in many places, you see horse-drawn carriages. You see a burro pulling a wagon with people in it in Puerto Rico. You see, well, I won't be able to point it out exactly but looking through the pictures, there was a cart with 4 men pulling the cart.
Wow.
And so this is, you see poverty, abject poverty. We see women washing their clothes in the Ganges River. There are a couple of pictures of a burning ghat, where this was in India, where they cremate thousands and thousands of people, and you have jobs. It's just right there. You know, it's just a different sort of world.
So, did any of his work from the travels? Did anything ever get published? Was he even interested in that?
Well, after he retired, and I guess he retired because I was born. I messed it all up, you know. I came along, and so he left the sea and went back to land. He bought a press camera in 1952. We've got a press camera here. And he used it. He took a picture of a cat drinking water out of a sink and sent it to the local newspaper. At that time, we lived in Brownsville, Texas. And he got $2.50 for it.
$2.50. Okay.
And in between trips, in the late 1940s, he and my mother lived in New Orleans. I was born in New Orleans. And he and another man had a little photography thing. They had a couple of girls, shall we say, who went around with cameras to the bars and nightclubs and took pictures of patrons. Then they ran the film back to my father in this darkroom place, and he did what was called wet print.
Okay.
Have you heard of that?
I'm not sure that I'm familiar with that.
Okay, well, the negative, they didn't dry everything. They used the negative when it was wet and printed pictures, and they would run them back to whoever wanted them, the customers.
That's interesting.
And I have no idea. He probably didn't do that a whole lot,
right.
But he did that in between some trips, helped with that.
So that was a little bit of, I guess, a moneymaker then.
Yeah,
I mean, not much, but...
Not much, but anyway, kept your hand in photography.
Right.
And when I was in high school, he went to one of the proms and took pictures of the kids at all the tables, and I took the pictures to school, put them up on a wall, and some kids bought them for 75 cents a piece. So that was his big money maker.
So, so what was his biggest, or what do you think possibly maybe was his biggest, I don't know if it's accomplishment's the right word I'm looking at, but like if there was a project, did he ever do projects? Did he ever have like a body of work or anything like that?
No, I think this was, and it's unfortunate because he does have a body of work,
Right.
and I need to go back through. He carefully cataloged all of his negatives, and at that time, you know, you just put them all together and you put paper around them. You wrote on the outside what they were and kept them. And you know, I think he just did it because he enjoyed doing it so much. But when you have a large body of work like that, there's some pretty stunning things from time to time in it. And when you go all around the world doing these things,
Right.
you know, he was in the Philippines, Japan, Korea, you know, it was just fascinating.
Right, right. I just wonder, so the photography that he did on the trip was what I would call maybe street photography.
Yes.
You know, they're very informal portraits of people or events and things that are happening.
Yes. A snapshot in time.
Right. You're capturing this moment. So what was his photography like around the family? I mean, was it a lot of fun stuff, or was he so kind of caught up in the other that he didn't take a lot of photographs of you and your family?
Right. I think I took more photographs growing up than he did, because he had a job and other things, and I think it was mostly what he did was in a time and place, and he used a twin lens reflex camera, and that was work because you had a light meter. You know, and it was art. And sometimes in your life, there's a certain period where you do certain things. And I think it was this. And not only was this a snapshot of what was going on in the world at that time, but maybe a snapshot or a time of his life. And so, no, it was not carried on. And that's one of the things that makes it very special to me, because it was just about a 5-year period that really he was into this art, shall we say.
Right. Well, and you're right. I mean, the technology is so different. I mean, as the years go by, technology even changes faster and faster, and I know that's even hard for us to believe now.
Oh, yes.
You know, a year makes so much difference between what a camera or a computer can do. But you're right. And one of the things I've always appreciated about film photography, and when I started photography, it was pre-digital, is the time that it does take. It teaches you patience, but at the same time, it also teaches you to be able to quickly recognize those moments,
Right.
And be able to get that camera, get that twin lens out. You got to pop that hood. You got to get it focused. You have to have your light meter, and if you're shooting manual, then you're setting your aperture and your shutter speed. So there's almost half a dozen or more things that your brain's doing in addition to keeping an eye on whatever the subject is and making sure you're going to capture it at the same time.
And if the subject is moving, and then you've got to think about how is this going to look? How am I going to frame this? Because, you know, a lot of photography, even with digital, he had an eye. In other words, he saw, he set things up. You could see in some of the pictures that it wasn't just snap, that he was constructing it there and setting it up.
Right. Well, and if he was using that twin lens on any of his street photography,
oh, it was all.
It was all that.
All twin lens.
Okay. Yeah. Then my hat's off to him.
Yeah. Well, that's what I find so remarkable.
Right.
As well as just the subject matter too, because.
Right.
Gosh.
I mean, because you're getting that down to, you've adjusted all those items, and then for a fraction of a second, you're trying to capture that. You know, that right shadow or that right light or whatever it is that the subject is.
And also, he was a man without fear. I mean, he would go in the back alley and take the picture if he wanted it. You know, I mean.
Well, that kind of references what I was getting at before. Was what, you know, there's goodwill. You know, you have your camera and that attracts some good things. Was there ever a time when?
No, I don't think so.
You don't
He
think
never.
so? Okay.
He never said anything he was afraid of anything or that anything happened that he was concerned about.
Oh, that's good. That's
no,
good.
he made it there and made it back, and of course there was they had to get a shore pass, and they had to be at a certain place at a certain time. The ship was leaving. Goodbye.
Right.
So yeah, he always got back.
So, is there anything else that maybe we haven't covered? Was there any part maybe during? Maybe right after the war, was there anything else in there that maybe that we missed?
Oh, I don't really think so. The pictures that I have, I mean, I'm sure that there were other shots that tell you more about that it was just right after the war. I mean, I know I have, and I'm not sure I put this photo in there. In the Philippines, there were buildings with bullets in them.
Okay.
And he had, let's see, in Korea, it was just this, and this kind of is, I think, unsettling a little bit. It was just the beginning of the Korean conflict, because he was there about 1950, and it went on to 1953. UN forces were there, and he was on his ship, the Green Valley, and took a picture. There were tents with military people right there on the dock. And then some of the pictures that he showed, citizens standing around bombed out homes and looking very startled and strange. And, it was like, myself not being as courageous, I would have felt a little uncomfortable being in those places, perhaps at that time.
Right. Yeah, that seems like a very insecure environment to be in, for sure. A lot of chaos. Mm-hmm. So, if I was going to ask you, this will be our last question for the interview.
Okay.
If I was going to ask you to sum up your father's work, your father's photography work, in one sentence or one phrase, maybe even one word, if you could even get it down to that. You've shared some with me, and so I know it covers a lot of subject matter.
Life through the lens.
Life through the lens.
Yeah, we get to see life through the lens.
Well, he had a lot of life to document, for sure,
yes,
on all of his trips. That is for sure. Well, Johanna, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your father's story, or stories, should I say. It's been so interesting, and I'm so glad that we finally have gotten to do this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, I'm Todd Birdsong, and this has been another episode of Stage Sessions. And again, I'm going to thank my guest, Johanna Comisak-Rhodes, for being here today. And join us next time for our next episode.